Curtin Radio.
Well, Wittenoom was established as a blue asbestos mining town back in 1937, and despite health warnings as early as 1948, it continued to operate until 1966. And of course, as we know, we lost thousands of workers, their families and town visitors. And very sad to say that the contamination of the town and its surrounding gorges continue to kill traditional owners and visitors to the region. This has to stop, so says Melita Markey, CEO of Asbestos Diseases Society of Australia. Melita, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
Look, it's a great pleasure. I think when we were dealing with this news way back when, it was such a shock to everybody, and to think who we knew that might have worked there passed through. We had asbestos homes, asbestos fences. There was a lot of urgency and concern about the situation. Can you just touch on the history of the area for us?
Absolutely. Look, way back in sort of early as 1937, Lang Hancock was prospecting around looking for asbestos. Now, blue asbestos in particular was very sought after because it was so valued in fire protection, in putting in gas masks and in military uses. So he was looking around, he found some. He set up a very primitive mine and used local Indigenous people to help him with that. And then in 1943, the government keen to develop the Pilbara region with encourage big business, CSR, and they came over and purchased the mine off Lang and established Australian Blue Asbestos, which ran till 1966.
Yes, like we mentioned earlier. I mean, I can't imagine how it went on for that long when there were early warnings in 1937. Do you know what those warnings were, what the signs were that it was going to be as deadly as it was? Well,
there was a young flying doctor assigned to the region. He came from the north of England where there was a lot of industry and many of the shipbuilding yards. In fact, the shipbuilding area of the UK, Barra and Vaness, has the highest incidence of malignant mesothelioma in the world, and it's a town of 50,000 people. WA has the highest in terms of a city in the world of malignant mesothelioma. So he was a young flying doctor there. He'd seen a lot of the industrial stuff in England, understood industrial medicine, and in 1948 he flew into Wittenoom, met with some of the towns, inspected the area, and wrote a report to the Public Health Department stating that Wittenoom would produce the most lethal crop of asbestos cases in the world's literature.
Why was it ignored, do you think?
There are a couple of reasons. It wasn't necessarily ignored. Numerous people from the health department came and inspected, and what would happen is they would get warning and they would run around and tidy up and put masks on people, but it was very hot there and workers would take them off. They weren't really fit for purpose. The extraction systems weren't great. So there's a lot of behaviour going on to sort of minimise the impact of the inspections. But at the same time, the unions became involved and they came in and had a look and they said, look, it isn't great, but how about we pay the workers more?
Oh, dear. Yeah.
So in fact, what happened was they rather than negotiating a safer environment, they negotiated much higher wages. So in fact, people were getting paid quite a bit to be there, but not understanding what they were getting for that money.
The numbers that were in Wittenoom around that time, you know, from the start, obviously people didn't last all that time until 1966, but it was a thriving community, was it?
It was beautiful. I talked to many people that lived in Wittenoom and grew up there, and they said it was a lovely community. People really pulled together because what you found with Wittenoom is whole families migrated from Europe and they went there. And it wasn't always a choice. They were bonded. So what happened was you took a job there and then they took away your wages for several months till you paid for your plane fare, your accommodation, a whole range of things. So by that stage, the harshness, or you'd sort of settled in by then because you'd been bonded.
I'm
So it wasn't a situation.
You know, people coming in from other countries would have been a bit of a surprise, I think, to be, you know, in the Pilbara region like that. And, you know, the situation, tell me if I'm wrong here, but symptoms were not sort of shown immediately, were they? If to have this, can't you have asbestos in your lungs for many, many years before it presents itself as a problem?
That's right. Look, there's a couple of ways. There's basically what we call occupational exposure, and that's when you're working consistently with it in the mine, in the mill, and then you can develop a lung condition called asbestosis or fibrosis, so damage to your lungs, which affects your breathing. And then there's people that can just be there and not work there, say live in the town, be a housewife, be a child in the school playground, and you can then 20 to 50 years later, it's called a very long latency period, the fibres are very fine, they lodge in the pleura, causing mutations, and then eventually in some people lead to asbestos-related cancers like mesothelioma and lung cancer.
Well, when you talk about the numbers, it's absolutely phenomenal. And the fact that the Asbestos Diseases Society of Australia is still very strong out there in giving out messages about now not visiting the area, is that the role that you're playing at the moment?
We actually play a number of roles. Advocacy is one of those roles. The other area is we provide health checks for people who have been exposed to asbestos either through their work or non-occupationally, putting up fences in their yards, and we keep an eye on people.
Okay, you're doing an incredible job. When we've got visitors, and I think it's quoted here, way back, there were 40,000 tourists visiting the area in the 90s. What about these days? Aren't people more educated?
No, this is the problem. This is what led us to develop this campaign. We are it's very easy to assume that you mention Wittenoom and people know what you're talking about. And when we started seeing so many images on social media, and they went around the world, and people were phoning us from the UK for interviews in our office, and we thought we must look into this. So we actually looked and set up some research, and we followed sites for over a year, and we realised there's a younger generation that don't understand the dangers.
Goodness.
They don't understand in 20 to 40 years they could be looking down the barrel of something really horrendous. So we just felt that it was time to remind people that not to play Russian roulette, particularly with your children's lives, because they're so much more vulnerable to asbestos fibre than adults are.
What is the town of Wittenoom like these days? Are people still living there? Surely not.
Yes, there's a couple of stragglers that are still there hanging on, and that's part of why there's a bill before Parliament at the moment, hoping to be read in next week, the Wittenoom Closure Bill, to give these people some compensation because they're hanging out to get some money for these properties they've bought.
Yeah.
And we can finally get rid of them. We've cut off, the power's been cut off, the water's been cut off, it's all essential services. They still refuse to leave. They want compensation for their properties.
So that's the plan for the future of Wittenoom under the government, is it? The federal government to actually really completely close the town down, fence it off, warning signs, that's to go to that extreme?
Well, no, it's the state government actually.
State, okay, yeah.
So, yes, so it's with the state parliament now. And the Lands Minister, Mr Tony Goody, Honourable Minister Tony Goody. And they're looking at, right now there's signs now, they bulldoze roads, but what happens is when you're in Karajini, you can go overland, and so many people have told us, when they've heard our warnings, they've run us really horrified. They didn't realise they'd done something. And they said, oh, look, we just followed a group of people that were going there like a four-wheel drive train, so we didn't actually get it. And we said, well, look, keep your photos, don't burn or destroy them, because if you ever need them in the future to prove that you were there, it's important. But what we're finding is even organisations like the RAC, we had to point out to them that while Wittenoom is a ghost town, it shouldn't be in their top 8 ghost towns. Good
point. A very good point. That's ridiculous.
It is. The people are getting very mixed messages. So people back in the 90s who were heading there, it was a very mixed message. There was a parliamentary inquiry in 1993 about what to do with it, whether to clean it up. The real issue is, and everyone decided at that time, it's a bit too hard. We'll just tell people to go around it. But they didn't warn about how specifically dangerous it was. Okay. And I think that's the issue now. We really need to get out to people. And one of the things we talked about as a better deterrent is perhaps a permanent memorial in Karajini to all the lives lost to asbestos diseases from the Wittenoom mining and milling operation and living in the town and all the visitors there, and have space for more names because we're still going to get deaths from Wittenoom, unfortunately. And that when you've got thousands of names on a memorial, it might just be a deterrent. You know, do you really want your name on that memorial? Don't go.
Very good point. I guess if they see a town that's a bit of a ghost town and there's no operations being held, you know, with the asbestos flying through the air or anything, they probably consider it to be safe, which is an assumption, which is not true. It's extremely easy, isn't it? Is it not to get just a fibre?
Yes, it is. Yeah, they're just blowing. And they're lodging your lungs. This is your breathing, and that's why children are more vulnerable. They're closer to the ground, they respirate faster, they can bring in more fibre. And the thing that's interesting about the Wittenoom fibre, the blue asbestos, it's very rare. There's only another mine in South Africa. And it's very fine and very sharp, hence why it was so sought after industrially, say like some filters and gas masks in the Second World War.
Oh, my gosh.
And that's what makes it more lethal.
Yeah, it certainly does. You know, this is a very timely warning because everyone is travelling in their own state at the moment, if they're able to. We are in WA. And if it's on the brochures to go through there, I mean, it is a ridiculous situation, isn't it? I mean, just talking about what asbestos was used for, to stop worrying people in the metropolitan area and regional areas, a lot of homes were built in asbestos back in the 60s, perhaps 50s, 60s?
Yeah, post-war, because it was very cheap and affordable, very easy to get. Yeah.
Are they sort of getting rid of those properties now?
Oh, look, yes, there are. Over time, with redevelopment infill, they're slowly being got rid of, but there's still so much in our buildings, so many in farming properties. You know, it was so easy for farmers to use. And so there's so much on rural properties. There's still very much a lot out there. And in small places you wouldn't realise.
So are those people susceptible in those homes?
Only if they drill or sand the home.
Yeah.
So it's when you release the fibre. So with a high-speed drill or whether you're sanding a wall to paint it.
I think I did hear years back that asbestos fencing that we have used in the metropolitan area for years is not the danger one. Is that right?
Well, what happened was we stopped using asbestos after 1990. So what you'll find is we stopped bringing it in. So then we had fibrous cement sheeting.
Yeah,
What the issue was, a lot of organisations still had it stockpiled. So realistically, you could still get your hands on asbestos sheeting up until 2003.
Yeah, it's incredible.
So while we stopped building with it, so we say to people, look, if your home is built before, say 2000, get it checked.
Yeah, good point.
Just if you've got that fibro sheeting, just get it checked. We're on the side of caution. If it's before 1990, well, then definitely, you've got to deal with something.
Melita, what's your connection with the society? I mean, do you have a history of people that you know that have contracted this?
Well, my father was in Wittenoom actually.
Ah, right.
And he was a miner. He actually got bonded to go there, and he'd been working. He was a mining engineer, and he'd been working in Europe, in Germany. And he said you could eat off the floor in the mines there. They were immaculate. And he said he got here to do some engineering, electrical stuff, and he went there and he said it was so filthy and so disgusting. He couldn't believe it, the dust everywhere. And he was in the single men's quarters, and he won a lot of money playing poker. It was Christmas.
Good on him.
And so he basically paid the pilots £50 to fly him out of Wittenoom, which back in 1961 was a hell of a lot of money. So he was there all of 3 weeks.
Don't blame him. You weren't there at all living, were you?
No. He just put it down. He was there 3 weeks, moved on with his life.
Yeah.
And just went on to have a fairly successful career and didn't even look back on it until he saw a program on Four Corners and realised that he saw people that he knew and they were dying, and he contacted them, and, the rest is history.
We've heard a lot of stories about families that were up there and children were playing in the asbestos dust, as some kids do, that sort of thing. Have you, all these years later, have any of those children come forward as adults and presented with symptoms?
Oh, very many, particularly from the school. Oh. One of the challenges you had in Wittenoom, there wasn't dirt like we have here. It's very hard. So what they did was they filled the children's playgrounds with blue asbestos tailings from the mill.
Goodness.
So the children just played in it, like where you have white sand under a swing set in the local park. That's what they had. It was all in their driveways. It was in people's gardens. So, yes, we've had a lot of children present. In fact, there's some quite iconic pictures of children on a wagon for a particular day. It was like a princess for a day. I can't recall what they were doing. And we can name all the children on that wagon that have passed away from mesothelioma. And in fact, there's an iconic picture of two little boys playing in the dust, and they're on the cover of a French book regarding disasters, world disasters.
Yeah.
Wittenoom is considered Australia's greatest industrial disaster and one of the highest in the world. And this little boy, pictures on the book in France, and they both died in their early 30s from mesothelioma. Yeah.
As children. And just finally, do we have, I think you mentioned elsewhere in the world where they have blue asbestos, we were the biggest or the largest. Elsewhere, have they had these same situations arise?
Oh, absolutely. It's a worldwide problem.
Yeah. And
in South Africa, there was the guy who actually found the disease, mesothelioma, named it. He was Professor Wagner in South Africa, and he observed it from the workers in the blue asbestos mine in South Africa. So he identified the disease from watching the workers succumb to it.
Yeah.
But we've got more epidemics coming, particularly in Indonesia, because one of the things, we also mine the asbestos, but we also manufactured it in WA with a couple of plants, James Hardie plant, making the Hardie paint, in Welshpool and Rivervale. When they closed, when Australia banned asbestos mining and manufacturing, they moved to Indonesia.
Yeah.
So they've been there now for over 20 years, and so they're now presenting with problems.
Yeah. Gosh, the benefit of hindsight, It would be wonderful, wouldn't it? Yeah. Look, we've had someone just ring through, leave a message here, and you'll be absolutely in opposing opinion on this, I'm sure. But Malcolm of Armidale, he said he recently spent 2 weeks in the Wittenoom Gorge. He commented the Wittenoom stories of asbestos everywhere. He thinks is not so. It's part of the history. Of course it is, but it's a disastrous history of who we are. I bet the area around is good. He says if you use common sense, stay on the right track, don't create a lot of dust, you will be safe and you'll love the scenery in the magnificent state.
Well, obviously we'd have to take a look at his medical qualifications in regard to that. But the issue with asbestos fibres is it's the ones that you don't see that kill you. They're under 5 microns, and they're everywhere. And the challenge you have is to what we're hoping is there will be some remediation where they may seal some of those areas where the fibres, what they did was they just piled the fibres in between the gorges.
Yeah, that's
Cut them in. So if you look at aerial photos, it's almost like a tooth. I mean, it's almost like you need to cap them like a tooth. But he is absolutely right. It is truly spectacular country. And I've got reports back, parliamentary reports, talking about how beautiful it is, how they'd love to open it up to tourism. But he might just sit back and step back and say, well, if it wasn't a risk for government in terms of insurance for people, why hasn't it opened for tourism?
Yeah, that's very true.
That says it all, really, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Melita, if people want to know a little bit more about the situation, well, you've explained it very clearly, just don't go there. If they want to know a little bit about your society, do you have a website at all?
We do, yes. It's www.asbestosdiseases.org.au. And if they could sign our petition on change.org, Wittenoom Memorial, for our memorial in the Pilbara and also in Perth, that would be fabulous.
Oh, you're doing incredible work. You really are. It's ongoing. And thank you very much for sharing that. And let's just hope people's common sense will take hold of it all. Thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. That's Melita Markey, CEO of the Asbestos Diseases Society of Australia.